Buenos días, estudiantes. Me llamo Señora L. Y hoy vamos a hablar sobre nuestro mundo y los mapas. Hi, my name is Señora L, and today we are going to talk about the maps we use to navigate through our world. In fact, the history of our whole navigation system. Now, we have been navigating this planet for thousands and thousands of years. And over time, the system and the methods by which we use to navigate have changed as we have learned more and studied more through science, our planet, our home. So as we look today, we are going to be talking about the directions, latitude, longitude, our equator, the prime meridian, and much more. This is the first in a series of videos on the geography of our world, and of course, Spanish as well. So we will be talking about the continents, the 21 Spanish-speaking countries, and their impact on the whole history of our planet, and how is interconnected. But first, let's discuss our equator. Now, the equator is the point. It's basically the middle of our planet in the north-south position. It is where our planet is widest in diameter and longest in circumference. We think of our planet, of course, as a sphere, which it is, but it's not a perfect sphere. In fact, at the equator, there is a slight bulge, so it's a little bit wider at the equator than it is anywhere else. And this is because of how our planet rotates around the sun. The equator was named by a French cartographer and scientist who lived in the country Ecuador for about 10 years in the 1700s. And by 1736, he had determined the equator. The equator is determined by the axis of rotation from our north to south poles. The equator is perpendicular to this axis. Now, the lines of latitude are determined in a 90-degree scale. Equator being 0 degrees, 90 degrees norte or north would be to the North Pole, and 90 degrees south, or a el sur, would be to the South Pole. So norte being north, sur or south. Now let's talk about the prime meridian. The prime meridian and the lines of longitude were determined thousands of years ago. Longitude was actually first developed by the Greek scientist Eratosthenes in Alexandria around 200 BCE. Ptolemy made them even more famous in his book and his maps, Geographia, in 140 ACE. Longitude are the lines that go from the North Pole to the South Pole. And these scientists over time developed that, or determined that our lines of longitude should be 360 degrees around our world. But to make this, we needed a point 0, a place to begin. Well, now there started the debate, because the point of beginning is what is called the prime meridian. And lots of different countries had lots of different opinions about where the beginning of longitude should be. The equator was determined by science, but the prime meridian, well, now that was up for debate. Well, in 1851, a man named Sir George Bedell Airy built the Transit Circle Telescope in the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, London. He determined in his cartography that from that point was the prime meridian. By 1854, many maps were using the same idea. And by 1884, there was a conjunction or a meeting in Washington, D.C. that determined that the prime meridian would start from this exact position, the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, London. But now, of course, our planet changes. Our planet evolves. By 1984, 100 years later, the International Reference Meridian was agreed upon by all nations in our world. And that meridian, it shifted slightly from its original position. It is now 102.5 meters east of the Royal Observatory. Our longitude and this prime meridian determine the eastern hemisphere and the western hemispheres of our world in a 180-degree scale. Now, of course, I can get into lots more detail on navigation, but main points for latitude, it is determined by the equator. And each line of latitude is equidistant between the equator and the poles. Longitude and how those lines were determined was actually developed through the use of clocks and time and the reported times of certain events like lunar eclipses. Now, stay tuned for more on our geografía and los continentes. And until then, hasta luego.